end of your talk could not have possibly been a better transition into what I'm going to be talking about, nor could have Clyde's talk on charis and joy. Now,
how'd that happen?
Yeah. Now, I often teach on arguably pretty deep theological topics. And what I'm about to talk with you about today, and probably a little bit tomorrow, we'll probably need a little more time to complete this, is not quite as deep, but it's probably about the most important lesson I could ever teach, myself included, because it affects all of us all day, every day, all the time. So I'm going to start off here again. You all figured out by now I like to be a little interactive. I'm going to ask a question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question. It's an easy question. I'm going to stop. I'm going to count to 3. And at the end of 3, I want you all to answer in unison, okay? Ready? What is the opposite of love? 1, 2, 3. Hatred, right?
Absence of love.
Or is it? Okay, so the reality is there are many opposites to love. There are many things contrary to love. Everything that Paul lists out in 1 Corinthians 13 as what love isn't, and we're going to be going over that here shortly, is an opposite of love. But I would argue to you that biblically, the deepest root opposite to love that underpins all the rest is fear. F-E-A-R. Whoa, what? We're all afraid all the time. Yeah, not hatred. Hatred is an opposite of love. But hatred is underpinned by fear. And this is one of the adversary's all-time greatest lies. Deceiving us into believing that fear is perfectly normal, that it's reasonable, that it's acceptable, that it's even good and realistic at times. How many times have you heard a pessimistic person say, I'm not negative, I'm just realistic. I'm not negative, I'm just practical, right? We have a lot of examples of figures from Scripture, including many godly men who made a lot of mistakes, relatively speaking, out of fear. I'm going to go through some of them here, quite a few, and I want you to think with each of these stories, most of them you should know, how did God respond to this? So we're going to kind of go in chronological order here. Abraham, a lot of you might not know this, but Abraham on a couple occasions, his wife Sarah was very beautiful, and he feared that the leaders, so Pharaoh first, and then Abimelech, so we have a king of the Philistines. In both cases, Abraham feared that once they saw his beautiful wife, they would kill him to take her. So with Pharaoh, he actually instructed Sarah, his wife, to claim to be his sister instead of his wife. And she gets taken into Pharaoh's house. And then God brings plagues on Egypt. Now, this is about 4,500 years before Moses. But then she's freed. Like, okay, this is clearly a sign we need to get rid of this woman. Then later, with the king of the Philistines, he tells her again, claim to be my sister. She gets taken into the house. And then God gives this leader a vision, and he knows he needs to release her. Jacob's sons, remember what they did to their younger brother Joseph? Out of fear, mostly from his dreams and the claims he was making, that he would have future rulership over them, which he did end up having. So they beat him, threw him in a pit, sold him into slavery, and then told their father the lie that he had been brutally mauled by an animal, breaking Jacob's heart. Moses feared confronting Pharaoh and speaking on God's behalf. He wasn't a good speaker. Neither was Paul, by the way, but Paul didn't have that fear. Aaron, Moses' brother, feared the pressure of the fellow Hebrews after the Exodus when they were in the wilderness, so he built the golden calf as an idol on their behalf and to avoid any repercussions from them. Jonah feared going to Nineveh and confronting a powerful enemy nation. King Saul refused out of fear for what the people would think and what in his mind was right, killing the king of the Amalekites, and later David taking his throne. King Herod, we went over this a little earlier, feared the prophesied king of the Jews overtaking his throne and ordered the killing of many young male children. The rich young ruler Jesus encouraged feared losing all of his wealth and worldly possessions to follow him. Nicodemus feared the Pharisees and Sadducees' reaction to him openly following Jesus as the Messiah. Pilate feared political backlash and accusations of disloyalty to Caesar if he didn't go through with the crucifixion. The Pharisees and Sadducees especially feared losing their status, respect, and power among the people as Jesus grew in fame and challenged their hypocrisy, often publicly. Peter feared being associated as one of Jesus' disciples right after his arrest, and despite having just claimed that he would never, even if all else was faith, he would never deny him, he denied him just as Jesus said he would 3 times. All of the disciples, in fact, feared for their lives after Jesus' death and hid themselves away. Now, not all fear seems bad, right? And seems is the key word. If you're out in a severe storm, exposed to the elements, yes, our fight or flight mechanism is going to kick in. And for a brief second, we're going to be scared. Depending on our level of faith, some of us might be really scared and for a long while. But it's wisdom. And Clyde and I were talking about this the other day. He made a great point. It's wisdom that says, seek shelter. But a lot of people are motivated primarily by their fear. And it's not surprising when we read about all these men I just went over that they were driven by fear, given their circumstances. But fear that stems from a lack of faith, a lack of complete trust in God, is the deepest opposite of love. I want to let you take that in for a second. Does that make sense? We're going to go over more, but it's the deeper root. It's the cause of nearly everything wicked, and it's the main enemy of joy and peace, of charis, of what we're after and what we've been called to. Our fear level, listen, our fear level all the time should be 0. How is that possible? Oh, well, we're going to go over how. And this is exactly, by the way, how organized religion, governments, really every institution, sales reps at companies, and a lot of people unknowingly sometimes manipulate and control billions of people through fear. So let's go over a couple of familiar but crucial passages that really drive this point home. 1 John 4:8. Now, this isn't one of Paul's letters, but this is a universal, rock-solid truth that Paul undoubtedly would have completely agreed with for us. It says, fear is not in love, but perfect love is casting out fear. Goes on to say, now he who is fearing, or she, is not perfected in love. Now, the interesting thing in this passage, beyond the fact that it says that fear has nothing at all to do with love, is that that phrase cast out in the Greek, when we look it up in a concordance, its meaning is violent and intense throwing away. We're not called to just try and remove fear from our lives. We're called to take a nuke to it. Okay? That's kind of dangerous to say in a religious gathering, I guess. No, not religious though. Okay. So Paul, 2 Timothy 1:7 says, this is awesome. For God gives us not a spirit of timidity, that is fear and lack of confidence, but of power and of love and of sanity. Listen, pay close attention here. Paul directly contrasts love and fear. And he says that where love produces power, love, and sanity, and of course that's rooted in faith, fear produces weakness, isolation, and insanity, confusion, inner turmoil, a desire to selfishly protect ourselves, all because we don't truly trust that our loving Father and creator of the universe is good and sovereign and is working all things out for our good. So fear grows. This is kind of a given, but listen, fear grows when our faith is weak. And interestingly, the root word, the Greek, for fear in 2 Timothy 1:7 means faithless. And you know what? This is exactly what fear really is. It's faithlessness. Now, am I saying that any time someone is scared and afraid or they're fearful, that they're lacking faith? Yes, I am. But am I saying that they're not a faithful person? That they're not a son or daughter of God? No, not saying that. It's a constant battle for all of us. But we have to have this understanding. Now, by focusing on fear as the deeper opposite of love, I'm not by any means condoning hatred, so don't get me wrong. But we need to recognize that the real catalyst behind everything that works against love, including hatred, is fear. And remember, or better yet, if you're taking notes, you might want to write this down. This is an important phrase. Hatred is often fear defending itself. Hatred disguises a deeper fear. So let's take a moment to list the things I mentioned earlier that 1 Corinthians 13 says love isn't, along with some other emotions and actions that run contrary to love. And we'll see that fear is at the root of them all. So we're told love is not jealous. When we're jealous of others, why? You know, it's interesting. Because when we're jealous of someone, it's because we admire something in them, right? It's because we look up to them. They're better looking, they're smarter, they're more talented. We actually like the person. But that jealousy can lead to hatred, and it's all rooted in fear. We fear that that person's going to steal the limelight, that they're going to get more recognition and more credit than we are. Love is not bragging. Why do we brag? Because we fear not being recognized for our strengths and our talents. And we need to let people know, okay, this is why I'm so great. Love isn't puffed up, okay? Similar, but when we act puffed up, it's because we fear being viewed as stupid or being looked down upon. Love isn't indecent. Well, why would we act indecently? Often because we fear being neglected. Why do kids act out? It's a cry for attention, right? And a lot of adults, especially less mature adults, do the same. Love isn't self-seeking, it isn't selfish. When we act selfishly, it's because we fear that our needs aren't going to be provided, right? So we have to take care of ourselves to ensure they are, or so we think. Love isn't incensed, it isn't overly angry. Well, why would we act overly angry? Usually because we fear being harmed or being a failure. We can all relate to these, can't we?
Yeah.
Love isn't, this is a big one, taking account of evil. Or we can more easily think of this as holding grudges. Why do we hold grudges? Out of fear, naturally, that someone who has hurt us time and time again is just going to repeat the behavior and do it again. And when Peter asked Jesus, how many times am I, right, what did he say? Not 7, 70 times 7. And the point is an indefinite number, right? Because that's what love demands, and love conquers what? Fear. And lastly, love isn't rejoicing in injustice. Now, this one's kind of hard. Why would anyone rejoice in injustice? This is why, this is why genocide happens. It's out of fear, You view a certain ethnic group as being a stain or whatever it may be. So you react in fear, and people even, they mass around other leaders to try and protect themselves. When we maliciously lie, it's because we fear others knowing the truth. When we wrongfully accuse others, it's because we fear that our own shortcomings will be found out. It's why Jesus said to remove the plank in your own eye before you point out the speck in your brother's, right? When we push others away, when we avoid any and all risk and don't live boldly, when parents refuse to discipline their kids, when we become, this is a big one, politically active. It's all out of fear. Fear that we need to take the reins and the control because we don't trust that God has it all under control and that he's working it all out for the good. Now, I want to be clear here. My goal is not to guilt trip anyone here or anyone watching. I'm guilty of this. I find myself in fear from time to time, and I need to remind myself of this lesson just as much as any of you might need to hear it. But true peace and joy can only flourish when we overcome fear by trusting and knowing through realization of God and Christ that our current posture, the way we stand, is firmly fixed apart from fear, just as we read in our prior passages. Now, interestingly, the phrases fear not, be not afraid, and the like appear approximately 365 times in Scripture, which, by the way, is far more often than passages pertaining to hatred. God's trying to tell us something about the importance of overcoming fear, even more than the importance of overcoming hate. And that's because hate is fueled by fear. We're, back to what Mark was saying earlier, we are the sons and daughters of God, destined to one day be lesser gods and the complement of Christ. So I ask you, what in the world do we have to fear? Literally nothing. And I mean nothing. Anything you encounter, no matter how scary it may initially be. You know what faith and love say? You know what they teach us to do? To immediately ground ourselves in these truths and say, you know what? Father's got it all under control. There is nothing to be afraid of. So I'm not going to fear. I'm going to get on about it. Right? How often do we need to be reminded of this truth? So recognizing fear as the deepest opposite of love changes everything about how we think, feel, and act, especially toward each other. Fear causes us to feel as though we need to constantly protect ourselves. And modern psychologists and therapists would say putting up walls, right? We've all heard that phrase. Putting up walls to avoid others because we have to protect ourselves. But love says, freely give and experience wonderful, albeit at times difficult, relationships. And you know what? The closer we are to others, the harder it is when we argue, right? It's no wonder that husbands and wives and parents and their kids and very close friends have it out more than other people because they're close and they place their trust in that person and because they fear what could happen if they don't have their approval, their love. So this has to be put at the forefront of everything. Ultimately, every experience and decision we have in life is rooted in either doubt-fueled fear or confidence-fueled love. We have to stop and remind ourselves continually that fear has no place, none, in our calling. And what we have been freed from is the bondage of fear in addition to sin and death. It's been replaced with total peace stemming from our unfathomable expectation. Now, if you noticed on the sheet, the talk is titled fear and rest, they aren't what we think. And you could ask yourself, well, how in the world do fear and rest relate to each other? Well, they're intimately related, as we're about to see. So, first of all, we obviously can't experience rest in its true form, if at all, when we live in constant fear. How could we? It's impossible to be at peace when fear consumes our thoughts and drives us to act in ways that oppose truth, trust in God, and love. And make no mistakes, our beliefs determine our actions. I'm going to say that again because it's vital. Our beliefs determine our actions. In fact, that's true every second of every day we live. If I walk out this parking lot to my car, a seemingly totally insignificant act, it's because I trust that I'm going to make it there safely, right? If I take a drink out of a cup, super minor. It's because I trust that drinking that isn't going to harm my health and be to my detriment, right? So we take a lot for granted, but our actions are always dictated by what we believe. And the greater realization we have of our Father and of Christ, our Lord, the less we have to fear. We live today in the most advanced society to date with every modern convenience imaginable, yet we are the most tired, exhausted, and depressed generation probably ever. Millions of people are on antidepressants. Prescriptions for SSRIs have, they've tripled over just the past 2 decades. They're one of the most commonly prescribed prescription drugs. The suicide rate is sky high. I bet every one of us in here knows someone or multiple people who have committed suicide. In fact, I'm not going to name names, but I knew a young girl who was close to my daughter who just recently killed herself. Our society is clearly becoming increasingly divided. Fear is, of course, the root of much of this, but equally important is the fact that we don't understand really at all what biblical rest really looks like. So we read early on in the creation account, the first example we're given of rest, the first time it's mentioned, is day 7 of creation, when we're told that after finishing his creation, God rested. Does that make much sense? Does Almighty God need to rest? Yeah, so everyone reads this and they go, okay, well, this has to have some kind of different meaning. And yeah, God wasn't taking a much needed break when he said that he rested. He was, listen closely to this, he was surveying and admiring his completed work that he saw as finished and declared as good. He was enthroning himself over his creation and setting an example for what rest really is. And this concept was so important to him that in the law he instituted the Sabbath for Israel to observe every week until our true Shabbat rest, Christ, conquered our greatest enemies, sin and death and fear. Yep. This was to return us to our original state of harmony, unity, and peace that began in Eden and functioned as the ideal model. Now, interestingly, there are several scriptural terms that mean rest in some form, and I want you to listen to their true meanings because they're fascinating. And collectively, this gives us a very good idea of what biblical rest and our true rest really looks like. So we have the word Shabbat, which means work is finished. Nuah, which means you are rightly placed. Menuah, a similar word that means you are securely settled. Shakat means opposition is subdued. Your enemies have been disarmed. Anaposis, difficult word, means striving has ceased. And a similar word, kataposis, means you are sharing in God's completed order. So here's what biblical rest really looks like. It means our work is finished. We're rightly placed. We're securely settled. Our opposition is subdued. Our striving has ceased. and we're now sharing in the completed order of God. Wow. This is the foundation we truly live in. And recognizing our fixed position completely changes our posture. Again, how we stand and how we act in the face of any potential fear. Again, another interesting fact, man is created on which day? Man's day, day 6. Okay? But man's first full day, his first full experience alive is day 7. He begins in total rest. Adam worked from rest, not for rest. And that tiny little preposition, it changes everything. Since sin and death entered the picture, the true nature of rest and work have been twisted and corrupted. And we've come to view rest as a much needed luxury that we earn only after hard work and constant striving. We work, and work some more in order to be deserving or to feel deserving of a short period of rest. And we treat rest as just a brief pit stop, don't we? A short time to refuel before getting back on that hamster wheel, grinding away and letting it consume all of our energy and time, often to the detriment and expense of our loved ones and even our own sanity. Raise your hand if you can relate to that. Yeah, all of us. This vicious cycle just leads to more burnout, resentment, and, you guessed it, fear. In fact, Adam's first act after sinning was hiding from God because he was afraid. He was scared. Prior to the fall, fear wasn't even part of the equation. Think about that. Imagine resting and working continually, but never feeling like work is a burden or rest is an occasional convenience. And I'm here to tell you that's actually something we don't have to imagine, because it's the reality that we're not living in currently. We are, but we don't experience that, relatively speaking, but absolutely it's the reality that we know is true. So take note of this. We talked about the importance of the prepositions for and from. We are to work from rest, with rest as our solid foundation, not for rest. Working for rest produces slavery. Working from rest produces that original model in Eden, stewardship, care over what God's given us. And by the way, it's appropriate when we think of rest to think of a larger word that has it as its root, restoration, renewal. Not to do nothing, but to get back to our important work. God continually called the promised land for Israel a place of rest, a new Eden of sorts. But we read in Hebrews 3:19 that the Hebrews were unable to enter because of unbelief. And why didn't they believe? Fear. Lack of faith and trust in the God who had proven his power and provision countless times before their very eyes. You think they were stupid? Think again, because we're all susceptible to the same thing. Unbelief due to fear looks like, and this is important, looks like frantic striving. And we've been called to the exact opposite. A faith-filled life looks like maturity, confidence, gentleness, and peace. Jesus also constantly stressed that others would find rest in him. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But then he goes on in the next two verses, 29 and 30, to say something very interesting. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But wait a minute, a yoke is a working implement, right? It was a wooden bar used to join two oxen so that they could do half the work but carry twice the workload. But it's still work. Isn't the whole point of rest to not work? No. The whole point of rest is not to not work. The whole point of rest is to refuel us so we know where our true fixed position is so we can get back to work. This is the whole point, and this is what Jesus was stressing. The point is the right alignment of work. with the Father and with Him, rooted again in a solid foundation of rest. We've been taught, particularly here in America, that the cycle of life is working hard to earn retirement. I'm about over here. And I'm going to tell you, we feel like this is going to be a well-deserved rest after years of work, but it's not biblical.